Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Exercise Mechanic. I am once again joined by Brett Patterson and Ryan Taylor. Gentlemen, welcome back. Nice to
Hola.
see you guys.
How you doing?
I'm excellent, man. I'm excellent. I'm excited about today. As you guys know, in our team chat, I kind of tabled this topic a while back. We were just talking off air about kind of like where it came from. Maybe we'll get to that in a moment. But the topic for today and the thread we're going to pull on is that you genuinely have no idea what you're capable of and the value of setting really big goals that stretch you and that reveal to you, you know, what you're capable of doing and who you're capable of growing into. So the theme and the topic for today is like the value and the importance of like doing difficult things and actively stretching ourselves by pursuing things that are outside of our reach by design. And so, know that prior to recording, you guys tabled a few ideas. So why don't we dig into some of those? So whoever wants to go first, take us away.
I'll jump in there. Yeah, the first thing that popped into my head was so in 2022, like springtime, I made a commitment to do a triathlon, which I was fairly competitive in high school, but hadn't done since I think like, oh God, 15 years or something like that was the last one I had done. And I was pretty out of shape at the time, and part of that was like we had a kid during the pandemic. I was working from home. It wasn't really anybody's fault, but it was hard to like get a workout in when it's like you finish with a client, turn the computer off, and there's like a baby to take care of. So things got kind of pushed to the side, and decided I wanted a goal and something to reach for. And my mindset going into it, because I can tend to burn myself out when I have a goal like that and try to like push every workout to the limit and then just like totally burn out halfway through. I decided to kind of approach it from just like get the reps in and just like get the runs in, get the bikes in. It doesn't have to be fast, it doesn't have to kill myself, but just get them in regularly. And I was doing 5 to 6 workouts a week. And yeah, eventually did the triathlon, had some nutritional issues, so didn't hit the time goal that I wanted, but it was all right. Just leaves me wanting more. So I'm going to be doing it again this year, and try to hit that time goal a little bit.
Cool. And so so like through the pursuit of that, like what were some things that you learned? Like did you ever, yeah, what are some things that you learned, or perhaps that perhaps surprised you during the prep?
So getting into like more like long distance cardio, which I hadn't done in a while, like workouts that are over an hour, is a different sort of hard. That an hour long an hour spent in the gym doesn't really hit, or like intervals, or like a 10K run, which I can usually do under an hour. An hour and a half to 2 hours doing cardio, like steady state cardio, is like a different level of hard. But then, like everything else, once you do it enough, you just kind of get used to it. And like suddenly my like 15, 17K runs were the easiest one of the week, because the pace was fairly low, and it was just kind of a good time to meditate and turn my mind off. So that was really cool to see. And then like I really love that feeling when you like get over a plateau, and in weightlifting it might be like you hit a new number. In cardio training, I find it's almost like I have an extra lung. Like you get to a hill that you're like, oh, this is going to be hard, and you're halfway up it and you're like, no, this actually isn't that hard.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of the moments that I really, really love. And it's, I've been an athlete for a long enough time. I've hit those benchmarks before. But it's nice to get there again in an older body that recovers a little bit slowly, and knowing that like, hey, I can still do this. It might take a little bit more recovery, and I got to pay a bit more attention to the little things, but I can still get to those same places that I hit when I was 18 years old.
It's interesting, it reminds me of perhaps a parallel between, perhaps Brett and Brett and I's world, which is a little bit more like aerobic focused at this point, and Ryan, being the more get as enormous as possible world. And one thing that I found interesting through my prep for whether it be the first marathon that I did or the prep that I'm in currently is that, you from session to session, you don't necessarily see a ton of progress per se. But if you just kind of put in the work, just head down and just like complete one brick session after another, and just like stack those bricks, so to speak. Eventually, after you've done that for a while, you eventually reach a point where you're like, oh, fuck, there's a semblance of a wall that's being created. Or within the context of whether it be performance improvement within, the context of endurance, or Ryan for yourself, maybe it's like the accruing of tissue, or even performance in the gym, because I know that's a metric that you track, where it's like you just put in brick after brick after brick, and then next thing you know, it's like, oh, where'd this progression come from? And I'd be curious for both of you guys whether or not you've experienced that, because I find that for myself recently, there's been moments where I'm like, fuck, I've been going at this for coming up on 2 years now. Yeah, coming up on 2 years now. And and not long ago, there was a training session where seemingly something shifted, and like what felt like a drastic change in RPE, like something that would normally be like RPE 6 was like overnight RPE 4. And I was, during training, I was like, why is this so easy? This makes no sense. And it wasn't gradual. It didn't go from like RPE 6 to like 5.5 to 5.2 to 4.5. It was like seemingly a jump overnight. And I'm curious whether or not both of you guys have experienced that in your own ways, just like head down, do the work. And then seemingly overnight, the body makes these, like, not necessarily a leap, but the incremental jump is just relatively bigger. Have you guys ever experienced that?
Go for it, Ryan.
Yeah, I would say in bodybuilding, not as much, because the process so much is it's a slow process. I mean, all of this is, but putting on muscle tissue, even enhanced, just takes a really long time. I would say that I definitely experienced that kind of phenomena when I was powerlifting, where, anyone who's powerlifted, at least for me, I find the training to be very boring. You're kind of practicing the competition lifts, and they're close variations, and that's about it. So I'd go months and months and months where you're doing triples and sets of 5 and all this sub-max work, and kind of, you maybe hit these small PRs here and there, but nothing really feels that substantial. And then every once in a while I'll be like, oh, I just hit a 40-pound squat PR that felt like out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure, if you were to look back at the training, it isn't actually out of nowhere, but it feels that way.
Yeah.
And I do think, kind of bringing back to the, I guess, original prompt, probably the one thing that we'll all agree on, and maybe we'll get to later some of my other thoughts, but I do think that just the act of doing difficult things, I said this before we started recording, I think the act of doing difficult things, the part that becomes really valuable is all of the skills that you learn along the way, the personality traits that you develop. I also think it's an opportunity to shape yourself the way that you want to.
Agreed.
Because I think we are what we do. So if you are a person who commits to academia, if you're a person that commits to learning an instrument, like, you're deciding, like, I'm a person who does X, I'm a person that does Y. So I think that that in and of itself is an act of kind of deciding your identity, so to speak. I think for myself, it's quite funny. I use academia as an example because that was probably something that I excelled at the most when I was younger. And I found school actually to be quite easy. There was sort of a running joke when I was in high school. I think I studied for a test once, and a teacher saw me studying and was like, "Oh my God, like, what are you doing?" I was like, Like, it's kind of a big exam, so I'm just kind of going through my textbooks. Like, I've never seen you study before. And for context, like, I had basically like almost a full ride academic scholarship in university. So I did pretty well, and it was kind of easy for me. And because of that, I found it very boring. Now, I could have pursued academia to the point where, by the time I got to university, trust me, I was not the star anymore, and there were a lot smarter kids than me. But I never found that to be terribly challenging. And I actually got into weight training when I was 14 because I fucking sucked at it.
Yeah.
The first time that I ever bench pressed, and I like telling this story, especially if people who see me now that I'm a little bit bigger than I was back then.
Just a tad. Like what?
Just a tad.
10, 15 pounds.
Something like that.
Around there. Yeah.
But yeah, first time I ever bench pressed in the gym was in grade 9. And I got, and I mean this in the truest sense of the word, I got stapled by a 65-pound bench press.
Yeah.
Just like flopping my hands like this, like I couldn't move it off my chest. I was like, oh my God, this is embarrassing. But I like weirdly loved that. And for myself, I don't know how you guys feel. There is something particular about the training process and dieting and everything that goes into it that I love. That to me, it is a true expression of you get out of it what you put into it. Yeah. Even academia, like if you come from a wealthy family, you have access to better resources, you have access to better universities. Even, with certain sports, same thing, like depending on how wealthy your family is, the area you grew up in, we're in Canada here, or at least Brett and I are in Canada. Hockey is an exceptionally expensive sport, and that's a big barrier to entry for a lot of people. But man, like everyone can do push-ups, everyone can do lunges, everyone can run around the block. So there's something really simplistic about that I think I always fell in love with, that I fell in love with and I've kind of remained in love with. That I truly feel like it is a venture in you put in the inputs, you get the output. And it is kind of just very simplistic in that sense. So,
what one of the many things that came to mind when you were talking is a conversation that I believe we've had on this podcast, and it's also a big part of the internship as well. When we start talking about the relationship between habits and like habit change or our current habits and identity, and I forget the exact words that you used, Rye, but how it's like we very much like are what we do, I believe was kind of how you put it. And and one of the ways that James Clear, who wrote Atomic Habits, he talks about how, every action you take is a vote for the person you want to become. And I very much agree with that. And I find that, and there's a weird kind of exercise to kind of imagine this, or how would I say? But like, there's an interesting parallel or an intellectual exercise that we can do where, like, if you were to imagine if all of your memory got wiped in a moment and you had like zero memory of like who you are, your family, what a human being is, language, nothing. And it was just like unbridled awareness. In that place where you're just awareness in and of itself, what you also lose are all of the limits that you currently have. All of the limits that are associated to your identity are gone. And it kind of brings forward what feels like a truth that like identity is very much tethered to memory and life experiences. And of course, there's likely an element of nature there, and how the sense of identity is also associated to like a felt sense of like a feeling in your body. But there's a huge part of it that is informed by life experiences. And if you think of like you were saying, one of the big values in doing really hard things is who you become through that process. And like that really, really, really excites me. And I think, it's something that I'm living right now, because when I was younger, one of the biggest deterrents to my my progression in sport, in school, and then also professionally in my early years, was my poor relationship with failure. I just avoided anything where there was a risk of failure because it hurt too much. I wasn't able to handle it. But then going through the prep for the marathon, something was different. There was something like, I know that this is going to be really difficult. I actually don't think I can do this. And I also don't think that that's true. Like, I know better. Like, I know that this isn't true, that I'm not capable. So I'm just going to commit to the process. And on so many occasions, there were nights where I didn't want to train, where maybe my body hurt, or there was a shit session, or what have you. And because I was afraid of not being able to accomplish the end result, I just kept persisting and persisting and persisting and persisting. And the reason I'm bringing this up is, to your point, Rai, that experience has shaped me like profoundly. If I think of like the amount that I can tolerate now, even in a professional container, of like the amount of work that I can create on a daily basis, is significantly higher. And truly, I think that the reason why that is because of like my relationship with doing work is different through the marathon prep. And like, there's days where I'm tired and it's like, oh, and it's like, fuck. And it's like, but in a way, I know how that feels in a different context, going outside and running at 9 p.m. in the rain, because that's the only time you have. But it also, there's like a transferable kind of cognitive skill that I've been able to apply to both. So I'm really happy that you brought that up.
That's really cool. Ryan, I liked what you said about like, you get what you put into it, because it seems like there aren't a lot of things in life where you've got like a very clear input and output. Like it reminded me of this essay from Henry Rollins. Have you guys ever heard it? The essay about lifting?
No, man, but I just love how much you guys are such power nerds. Like, we're about to talk about an essay. I think this is great. Let it rip.
So, I mean, Henry Rollins is like former lead singer of Black Flag and like spoken word artist and like punk rock guy through and through. He's been an actor too. He was in Sons of Anarchy and played a white supremacist. But he's really, really smart and thoughtful guy, and also angry. But he's got this amazing essay about when he was in, I think, high school, and a coach or a teacher kind of takes him under his wing and teaches him how to lift, and how much self-worth he got out of it. He was a bit of a quote unquote loser at school, didn't have a lot of friends, and he just like gained this confidence through getting strong. And I pulled up the essay, and it ends with this, and I love this line. The iron never lies to you. You can walk outside and listen to all kinds of talk, get told you're a god or a total bastard. The iron will always kick you the real deal. The iron is the great reference point, the all-knowing perspective giver. Always there like a beacon in the pitch black. I've found the iron to be my greatest friend. Never freaks out on me, never runs. Friends may come and go, but 200 pounds is always 200 pounds.
I love that.
Yeah. Yeah, and like, no matter what's going on in your life, you go to the gym, that 200 pounds is still 200 pounds. It's gonna be as hard as it was yesterday. I mean, maybe not, but like, in terms of like objective measures, that thing is as heavy as it was yesterday. It's only you who's changing in respect to it, which I love.
I love that.
I have a couple of thoughts on both of the things that you guys said. ET, when you were talking about essentially just like your marathon better preparing you for other things that have come after it, it reminds me of a quote I saw from J.M. Blakely. I don't know if you guys are familiar with him. He, I think, held a world bench press record in like 6 or 7 different weight classes. He is like a legend in the powerlifting world. Also a legend for his weight gaining stories, but that's a whole other thing. Like his massing diet got so much, like in order to get more calories, because he couldn't chew anymore, he'd just put Hershey chocolates in his mouth so they would melt. And that was how he got even more calories. Anyway, yeah. But this guy is like, massive human being, obviously tremendously strong, one of the most soft-spoken individuals you'd ever listen to. And he has this quote that I really like where he talks about, you don't have confidence, you build confidence. And it's all about creating a series of wins so that when it comes time to call upon it, you have a history of winning that you can be confident in. And that idea is something that I really like. And, again, I feel like if we're bringing this back to the original kind of prompt, if we talk about training, it really is a series of stacking wins upon wins upon wins. And, as you had said, a bunch of nerds on this podcast that also lift weights and run. I remember I actually got a client once, it was probably about 10 years ago, who he was like very antisocial, kind of just played video games. I trained his mom, and then she wanted me to train him. And a big part of the reason why was she wanted her son to see that there were guys that could like lift weights, be social, but also be giant nerds. Nice. Like that, those two things could exist at the same time. Because I think that, there's kind of the old school stigma around like dumb meatheads and stuff like that.
Totally, man. Still to this day.
Yeah, true. Still to this day. When in reality, E.T., we've had, you've mentioned this before, since we've had a few people on here who are like kind of PED experts, there's still this notion like a bunch of dumb juice head, whatever. And all of these guys and women are incredibly thoughtful and incredibly intelligent. There are many brilliant people within the fitness space. And I would say that the fact that they're involved in fitness is a contributor to that. I don't think that it's an accident. Mm-hmm. I forget the Greek philosopher, but the idea of essentially like no man should not have like the power of his mind, power of his body. I can't remember exactly how it is.
I think it's Socrates.
Socrates, yeah.
I think it was Socrates, yeah.
I'm blowing the quote, but
I have it.
I think you guys know the point.
That's Seneca. That's my bad. I was going to say I'll look it up in the book right now.
Who's the nerd now? Pulling out your Greek philosophy from behind you.
The other thing I was thinking, and I'm wondering if you guys have any thoughts on this. I know we've been talking about kind of explicitly training. I know for myself, a lot of the life lessons that I've had came from a background of sport. One of them, I think there's a whole bunch that we can come up with, but I think one of the ones that has always been really valuable for myself is when I grew up playing hockey, because I played at a relatively high level. I was a decent player, won tournaments, was a captain of my hockey team, whatever. I made the championship, the finals for the league 3 times and never won. So I ended my minor hockey career having never technically won a championship, in spite of probably being one of the better players in the league. And I remember I've reflected on that. And one of the lessons that I gained from that was that I think that it's valuable to understand in life that you can do everything right and still lose. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious for you guys if there are lessons that you guys have learned kind of through sport that maybe aren't just the, commit to doing hard things, but I'm wondering if you guys have had other experiences from your athletic background that have sort of shaped you.
Definitely. I think I lean more towards an individual sport kind of personality. And those were the sports I was doing more of growing up until high school. And I really struggled in team sports for a while. I was pretty undersized and took a while to grow too. And football and rugby kind of sucked for the first couple of years. I was just getting beaten up. And then I started to develop friendships, and by our last couple of years, the entire defense were my close friends, and also almost the entire starters on the rugby team. So we had this really, really tight knit group, and I realized how fun team sports can be when you're just pals with everybody, and it just feels like you're just playing. And then going to Western and playing university ball and not having any friends, and there were some changes happening on the team at the time too, and realizing it's not it's not football that I love more than anything else. It's just playing with my buddies. And I cut it and left. And that was another good lesson too, was it's okay to quit if you don't like something. Like, you don't just have to suffer through it, which I did in high school and had some good results. And, maybe I could have been a great football player for Western, but instead I quit and I joined a band, and I met my now wife because of it, and, met some great people, and don't regret it, and would do it 100 times again. So those are definitely some of the like bigger lessons, was both stick-to-itiveness and knowing when to quit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was reflecting on one of the things that you mentioned. So I'm getting into the habit of making notes on podcasts, because normally I have ideas, and then sometimes my goldfish mind forgets them. I'll start with my first thought before we start kind of talking about, before addressing your question, Rye, about like, you can do everything you can, and on paper, everything should lead to the result that you want, but it's just not guaranteed. I'll circle back to that in a moment. One of the things that you talked about earlier was like the importance of stacking wins, and like how transformative that can be for people. And I made just a note here underneath that, because I agree. And the other piece that I want to just kind of double click on is that in addition to stacking wins, this type of like long form processes also teach you how to deal with like failure, because inevitably, like, what are you going to do when this situation punches you in the face? And, shout out to Mike Tyson with his quote. Like, what are you going to do when you get punched in the face? Like, how do you deal with that? Right? Like within bodybuilding, like there's no way that you're going to be excellent within your sport and not have to navigate niggles or outright like significant injury. There's no way, right? With your UCL and all that, like there's no way that's not going to happen. And that's also informative, right? Like I was the kind of like lead, I'm not going to say strength coach, but the lead trainer for this men's group not long ago. And the reason why I started working with them in that capacity was because exercise reveals oneself to themselves. Like exercise is a fucking mirror, right? And you start pushing into it, and whether it be acutely with discomfort or after a long like period of time, you get revealed to yourself and you get to work on that shit. And not only physically, like, it looks like the work is just physical, but I think you guys would agree that a huge part, whether it be bodybuilding or endurance sport or hockey, huge part of it is mental, so I just wanted to circle back to that, because that's at least for me, that feels like an important theme to highlight when it comes to like what you said earlier, Rye, of you can do everything right and still not win. It comes back to our conversation that we had with Mike Chalice earlier this week. And Mike is very much a student of Stoicism. And one of the things that he talked about is the dichotomy of control. And one of the things that the Stoics talk about within the dichotomy of control is that like there are certain things within your control and certain things that are outside of your control. And some of the things that are outside of your control are actually health. Like you can control all of the inputs. You can eat the right foods. You can go to bed and you can still get cancer. Like, there are it's not all within your control. And that's also an important thing that, like you were saying, when it comes to sport, that you can learn this really important life lesson within, the confines of a hockey rink. And, it's interesting. I think that if I remember correctly, your question, Rye, which was like, have there been moments where perhaps I've learned like those types of lessons within my own kind of like athletic journey, I believe was your question. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, essentially, like, were there life lessons that you've learned through sport?
Yeah. And, and for me, two thoughts come to mind. The first is I've learned that by reflecting back on my previous athletic history, that's when I really started learning that I had a real shit relationship with failure. Because I realized that I kind of spun a story, and the story was that I didn't care. And it's not true at all. I really cared. I loved, especially basketball and rock climbing. I loved those sports. And I fucking lied to myself that I didn't care about them a lot. as a means of letting myself off the hook, because failure was really painful. And so kind of like reflecting back on those moments and realizing like, whoa, I was like seduced by my lie. Like I bought into that, and that totally wasn't true, was a really important lesson for me to then realize the reason, or like the origin of that lie and that story, was that failure is really painful for me. So that's what I need to work on. And that's very much like, once again, that kind of led to this like endurance running journey that I had zero background in, because I was just like, it was chosen as a means of facing head on some of my psychological tendencies that are just kind of like not serving me, you know? So I think for me, right, through sport, I realized that I had this tendency and a really bad relationship with failure, and then leveraging sport as a means of tackling it.
That's really cool. I think I
Really
did
long
a
answer.
similar thing with school and academia. It was like at a certain point, it was like, well, I don't care if I don't do well in this class, because it's easier to accept the loss if you don't care about it.
Mm.
It's and you've used this example a few times, ET, of like building a house and building bricks, and it got me thinking and about how when you're kind of training yourself, you kind of have to be the architect and the subcontractor. Like you've got to have this big lofty goal that you've kind of planned out and you've created the blueprint for, and then you've got to set that aside or put it on the table while you go and like install tile. You've got to like do all those little things, that goal, the blueprint is still there, but you can't stare at it all day long. Like you refer to it when you need it, but you got to go back to doing all those little things. And I think for me, it's a lot easier to focus on those little things. And I think a lot of people would probably agree with this. And, big goals in life too, is just like break it into little parts, focus on those little parts. And then before you know it, you've got the house, or you've, saved up enough nuts for winter, or whatever metaphor you want to use for it.
Something I was thinking too, I didn't want to lead with this, but before we had started recording, I had said sort of the statement that you had made initially. I actually struggled resonating with it initially. I think that how do I phrase this? I think that something that people have a habit of doing that doesn't serve them. So I'm going to kind of play the other side of the coin on this a little bit. I think that it is amazing to do all these things and be able to reflect upon them and have these lessons that we've learned and so on and so forth. But I think that that is something that has to be done afterwards. And I believe, I can't remember where I read this, but there was some study on psychology with people who, when they told others their goals,
yes, for sure,
they would tell people their goals and they'd get this dopamine hit from doing that, and then they wouldn't actually pursue them. Mm-hmm. So similarly, I find, and kind of part of my French here, I find that oftentimes, and we're maybe myself the most, but we're all kind of on the online space because of fitness. You're inundated with all of these reels and memes and things that people state, and everyone wants to have some profound statement. And there does seem to be a lot of just like mental and spiritual masturbation. And sometimes, like, to me, the lesson and the grandiose thing comes after. Mm-hmm. On Monday, you show up and you bench. You know what I mean? That's kind of how I view it. It's very similar to something that kind of grinds my gears is when people aspire to influence others. Mm-hmm. It's like, no, you don't try to be someone who's inspiring. You act and you conduct yourself in such a manner that others are inspired by you. Mm-hmm. And I think like that distinction is really important. Very similar. I think that you shouldn't pursue skiing, running, bodybuilding, whatever it happens to be, because you're like, if I do this, I'm going to be a person that is, people are going to look up to me and so on and so forth. It's like, I just really like skiing. I want to get better at it. I'm just going to do that for 10 years. And then you look back on, you're like, holy shit, like, look at all these things I did. And, you know, people can tell you how much like your journey kind of inspired them, whatever it happens to be. I think that that's a trap that people can fall into, where it's very easy to almost put this label, this like big emotional, spiritual label on something. And you kind of just have to do the work.
Yeah, man. Honestly, I totally agree with you. And so two follow-up thoughts. The first has to do with, I guess, this like perhaps unspoken pressure. You mentioned social media. I find that, and I don't know if it's just because of this or like if there's a causal link here, or if it's just correlation. But regardless, there is this like, I think, very real pressure where if you want to leverage those platforms to reach people, it is advantageous to be prolific in terms of the frequency at which you put out things. And the truth is, like you were saying, is like, you know, rays of heaven shining down on you insight doesn't happen 3 times a day. Like, you know, it's the kind of thing, like you're saying, right, that like happens after a year and a half of grinding the thing, and then next thing you know, you have something meaningful to share, or what have you. And so that for me feels very true. And there's some folks that I've been genuinely, no bullshit, contemplating unfollowing them for this very reason, because I've always found that like aesthetically they create content that I'm like, oh, like that is nice to look at. And so you follow them because it's visually appealing. But then all of the other stuff that comes with it, this kind of like, I really like this term. It's like saccharine spirituality, like just like fake artificial sweetener spirituality kind of stuff. That people feel this kind of compulsion to put on their posts. It has really started turning me off, and I'm just like, I just don't want to engage with that at all. And go ahead.
I was just gonna say, what that makes me think of is it feels very similar to like when someone gives themselves a nickname.
Yeah,
you know
sure.
what I mean? Like it
just call me Duke.
I guess you can, like you're allowed to, but it just feels wrong.
Yeah.
And I'm not bothered by people that make posts that are more heartfelt and whatever else. But as you said, I think those moments of massive insight, they need to be authentically inspired. And as you said, like I don't have those moments 2 or 3 times a day. I don't even think I have them 2 or 3 times a month.
Yeah, or decade.
Maybe you just got to open your heart to these moments, Ryan. You're
exactly.
But actually, one thing you mentioned, like the social media space and like wanting to be an influencer, rather than like thinking about what other people think of me, I find a really helpful kind of like mental practice is to think back. I don't know if I've mentioned this before in the podcast, but think back when I was a child, like, I don't know, 8 to 12 years old, somewhere around there, and think would 8-year-old Brett be proud of me right now? Would he like what I'm doing right now? And there's a certain like innocence and like naivety to those ages that like you think that like, well, yeah, you can change the world and like you can be a great person, and like, you know, the complexity of life hasn't really like driven you into the ground yet. And so thinking back, like, would 8-year-old Brett like be pretty stoked on what I'm doing right now? And like, usually the answer is yeah. And that's kind of like my guiding light in a lot of ways. And I find it helpful, and it allows me to kind of like step outside of myself without, you know, using like the gen pop or like people on social media to use as kind of like the lens in which I'm viewing myself, if that makes sense.
I do think, E.T., I'd be really curious your thoughts on this as well, just because I think the two of us are a little bit more active on social media than maybe Brett is.
Brett has a burner account. It's called Only feet is the name of the burner.
Man, I really don't like engaging on social media in general. I check it like once a day. I know I got to do more, but like there's every time it comes time to post, I'm like, do I have to?
Yeah,
So
man.
maybe
Yeah.
that's something I got to work on with myself,
Well,
repairing my relationship with the social media.
Yeah.
Sorry,
what I
go
was
ahead,
going to
Ray.
say is, yeah, my social media relationship as a consumer, I love just watching stuff and learning and consuming things that are entertaining or I find insightful. And what I would say, and there's probably people that would disagree with me here, and it's probably a bad business move if I'm being frank about it. It feels so inauthentic to do the whole rigmarole of grabbing people's attention and whatnot. And it doesn't, there's a little bit of that. But I've always thought of the way that I have tried to view social media. It took me probably about a year of committing to it to sort of figure out, for lack of a better term, like what my voice was. Because I don't actually care to share my life on social media. I don't give a fuck if people like things. Like, I don't need people to think that my trip looked really fun. So for me, social media is obviously a means of marketing,
Mhm.
but I also think it needs to authentically reflect how I consider myself as a business entity, which is somebody that wants to like provide help to others. So the content that I need to put out there, to me, the lens I always look at it is this something I think is helpful? And am I honoring what the actual content is itself? Like, am I honoring what the source material is? And if I can say yes to those two things, I feel okay about it. Um, the little bit of a clickbaity part, and this is actually probably helpful for me because I have someone doing the editing and content stuff for me now.
Shout out to Rosina.
So
She's great.
shout out to Rosina, she's amazing. Uh, she'll put some catchy stuff on the thumbnails that I would probably never write. Uh, and I think we actually talked about this with Nick Shaw sometime last year,
Mhm.
where there is this balance of like, you do want to grab people's attention a little bit, but then the material that they're actually reading and engaging with, it needs to be honest. It needs to be hopefully something that's impactful. Uh, you will never catch me doing TikTok dances or whatever other shit people are doing online. And maybe that means I don't ever go viral, but like I can kind of live with that. I don't know if I feel like you probably are similar.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what both of you guys said. I mean, I relate to the hard line in the sand of just truly not being able to do inauthentic things and to pretend like I'm someone that I'm not on social media. It just maybe I don't know if this is a blessing or a curse. It's too yucky. I just feel too gross to be able to do that. And who knows? Maybe for other people, what they put out is very much a reflection of who they are. And I'm just comparing myself, who's very different, to all these other people that are fundamentally different. And so no wonder I'm like, oh, that's not me as I make that comparison. But I think that so I agree with that piece. Brett, I agree with what you said earlier in terms of like, this is probably something that I need to get better at. I've been really reflecting on that a lot because if we think of what the exercise mechanic is doing, not attempting to do, but that we're in the process of doing, we need to meet fitness professionals. There needs to be a way to like open that door and to start that relationship with trainers. So how do we do that? And whether or not that be leveraging strategic partnerships, excuse me, or leveraging an online medium or email marketing, it's essential to get eyes on. You can't this initiative that we're all a part of can't exist unless there's eyes on. So there is, and then this brings me to what you were just mentioning, Rye, in terms of like this, how would I say, this challenge of like finding how can you quote unquote play the game without, while also concurrently honoring who you are. How do you do that? That's hard. And And I don't know necessarily exactly where that is. I visualize it. I have like a really fantastic relationship with Venn diagrams. I have like a Venn diagram in my head for everything. I have a Venn diagrams for Venn diagrams. And so I think of like playing the game on, my left. And then I think of like who I am on the right, and they overlap very, very, very briefly. Or perhaps what is the exercise mechanic, and then also playing the game. And the exercise mechanic stands for things that I think you guys would agree is different than a lot of educational organizations. And so figuring out like who are we not, and creating content that's aligned with that is difficult. And what I'm realizing is that it takes a lot of iteration to figure that out, which then brings me back full circle to what you were saying earlier, Brett, where it's like, and honestly, it's kind of associated with what we were talking about as the initial theme of the podcast, which is like, there's value in committing to doing the hard thing, because of, for the sake of like what you discover through that process, and who you become.
Have you guys ever done social media content for another organization outside of your own? So for me, I've done
in a way. So like there's students, and I'm just sorry to interrupt. There's been students that I've done mentorship with that for them, I've helped them with it. Gotcha. And I have way more ease with it in comparison to myself.
It's like teaching someone else to do sales versus doing it yourself. It's like, so I've done some social media work for Titan. I had like a, stories takeover day for Epic when I worked there. And it is so much easier because there's like an emotional distance. It's like, this isn't me. I'm a part of this organization and I'm putting out this content, but it's not like my own business. And there's a lot less fear there for me. I'm kind of self-therapizing here and kind of working myself through my like social media fear on the podcast. But no, I think that there's definitely like an emotional, like a fear of like putting too much of myself out there as well. Or like, what if I'm wrong and I get called out or something like that?
Totally.
That actually reminds me, there was a post that Nick Shaw made very recently that I really liked. And it was something about, he was a fan of Diet Coke and thought Diet Coke was better than Coke Zero. And then he had Coke Zero because they were out of Diet Coke. And he was like, okay, it's actually the same. But the point of the post that I really liked was this ability to say, like, I made a statement about something publicly, and I'm willing to publicly go back on that statement. It's like I said something because that's what I believed. And now, once that I've gotten new information, I've updated what my opinion is. And I think that is something that's really powerful. I think especially because we're in, literally the education space through the exercise mechanic. But if you're a trainer, coach, etc., you're still adjacently in the education space. Most of us are not PhDs. Most of us are not actual academic experts in any of the fields that we're talking about. So like, we're still students in this as well. 100% I've made statements that are, potentially not all the way right, or maybe even completely wrong. But I think that there has to be a willingness, not only to, as we said before, like, honor what the content is, make as truthful a statement as you can, but then also be egoless enough that you are willing to update what that opinion is as you learn more or as the landscape changes.
Totally. Yeah, I agree. I made some notes earlier, of course. And because there was something that you had mentioned earlier, Brett, of when you're like training yourself, you use like a carpentry analogy of like, you're both the bricklayer,
and the subtrade.
Yeah, the architect and the dude,
subtrade.
The subtrade, the guy that does the things, perhaps. And for me, to kind of like make a parallel with what we were talking about with the social media piece and the ease that you experienced, Brett, when you were doing the social media day for Titan or for Epic, and the ease that I experience when I'm helping other folks with their content strategy. it just reminds me of the importance of having a coach. Because if I think of, like, for instance, with my training right now, I'm not the one writing my programs. Like, because if I do, I overthink it and I get lost in the weeds every single time. And whereas I'm really good at taking orders. Like, I'm a really, really, really good technician. Like, if you tell me what to do and to do something, like legit, I think if I was in the military, I'd be really good at it, because so long as I'm aligned with what they're telling me to do, that's something that's really important. Because if I'm not aligned with it, then it's like I dig my heels in, and it's just like, fuck that. You can't tell me to do something that I don't want to do. But like, so long, like, if I'm aligned with what we're doing and someone tells me what to do, I'm like, oh, thank goodness. Like, great. And then I can just go do the thing, and I can just focus on doing a really great job with it. And that's true with training for me, where if I don't have to make the decisions, like when the weight of decision making has been lifted, that for me is incredibly helpful. It's just like, practically, I'm not in my own way, and I can just focus on execution. And that's true in sport and in business. Like, it's one of the challenges that I push up against with the exercise mechanics sometimes, is like being able to move from the technician hat. I think it's the E-Myth. They talk about how there's 3 different hats that you wear when you're an entrepreneur. And they talk about how there's the technician hat, like you're in the trenches, so to speak, doing the stuff. There's the manager, who kind of deals and manages those folks. And then there's the visionary, who chooses the targets. And I'm a way better technician than I am a manager, and also visionary. And so it's, how would I say, it's the kind of thing that I need help with. And, maybe this would be one of the takeaways for those that listen, of being able to be able to discern for ourselves, like, when do we need help, right? Like, there are moments when it's the right thing to do, and it's valuable to just, like, head down, do the work, grit your teeth until you figure it out. And as much as that's true, it's also wise sometimes to just get help to speed things up, Where is that line, though? It's hard.
To go back to the metaphor of building a house, it's like the DIY, or do you hire professionals, right? Hiring professionals, as long as you're doing your research and you're hiring a quality professional, is almost always going to have a better end product, unless you've done a lot of DIY. But it's going to cost a lot more and might have some other complications in there. So, like, you might be willing to make the plan, make the blueprint yourself, and accept, some imperfection. Or maybe you've realized that, like, hey, it really isn't worth it for me to try to, like, churn through this by myself. I need to outsource and hire somebody to help.
Yeah, I think, echoing both of your sentiments and kind of bringing this back to the original conversation.
Been doing that, Mr. Boomerang, this evening. Let's
yeah,
bring it
exactly.
Back.
Let's bring it back now, y'all. Cha-cha again.
Yeah, cha-cha this time. Is that it?
I don't remember. I don't know. It's been a while since grade 7. So, but I think that, it's easy to interpret, the value of doing hard things being that you commit to things, you work hard at things, and whatever. And that's very much true. But I also think that one of the lessons when you go through a process and you work really hard is also understanding when and where it's appropriate to pull the plug.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, when you're talking about the 3 hats, I generally think I'm a decent technician and I'm a pretty good visionary. I'm a horrible manager. I'm horrible at managing myself. So part of why I outsourced the content side of things is I just didn't I know myself well enough, and I've done enough work in other areas that I knew that I would not do the job that I needed to do on my own. And I think it is valuable to have outsourced that. Like, the content's going to be better. I'm saving myself a lot of time. I'm saving myself a lot of headache. And those things allow me to commit more to things that I am better at and that I enjoy more. Not everybody has the You can't always do that, obviously, but I think that learning where your strengths lie and also where they don't, and when, as you had said, being willing to ask for help or outsource things in those moments, I think that that is also one of the lessons that you learn in committing to the process of doing something challenging.
Mm-hmm. And
Yeah.
just going like back to, being able to self-reflect during the process, and just like, it doesn't have to be pulling the plug entirely, or like, I can't do this anymore. It can be just like a bit of flexibility. Like, you're going in one direction, you see that like, I'm developing some elbow pain as I'm, progressing towards this goal. It's time to uh, kind of redirect a little bit, add some flexibility to this program, and then we'll hopefully veer back to the path when we're ready for it. I think that's valuable too, and not being so rigid that you end up kind of shooting yourself in the foot in the long run.
No doubt. Thank you for bringing that up. This is, and maybe this will be one of the last things we'll wrap up with this evening. In the internship, which sadly, actually, we had our last call today, so I'm a little bit bummed. On I think it was last week or the week before, we talked about goal setting amongst a variety of other topics, and one of the greatest predictors to like program adherence, at least in my experience and from the literature that I've read on behavioral psychology, is managing expectations from the beginning. And when people expect a linear, predictable path, and then life happens, there can sometimes be inferences that are made from those moments, such as like, I'm a failure, this isn't meant to be, I can't do this, yada, yada, yada. In contrast to if you let someone know that it's like, right now you're highly motivated, it's fucking awesome, amazing, love that, yes, let's go. And also at a certain point, there isn't going to be one cell in your body that's going to want to do the required work and steps to get you to where you want to go. Eventually, your motivation is going to be completely gone. Eventually, because we're like, whether it be bodybuilding or the goals that I have currently or you have, Brett, like it's inevitable that like as you're pushing your limits, it's pretty likely as you're doing that, you're probably going to stumble upon a limit as you're pushing your limits. What a concept. And what that looks like is like discomfort, pain, and you might need to like calibrate your volume a little bit. You might need to be flexible in how you approach things. That's not a sign that anything's wrong. It just is the journey, you know? And like, to like one of the big things that we've been talking about today is like the value in setting goals, the value in doing hard things. And we've been talking about it largely within the context of sport, and how those lessons and perhaps skills that we develop, these cognitive skills that we develop through sport, have applications outside of sport. And that's something that I've noticed as well, even within moving the exercise mechanic forward, is that historically in the past, it'd be like, man, this thing happened, that sucks. And in my head, it would be like, this is evidence of like, I don't know, should I be doing this at all? And, or this is evidence that we shouldn't be affiliated with this company or what have you. When in actuality, it's like, no, that's just what you signed up for, man. You just didn't know it. Like, it's a part of the game. It's going to be nonlinear. It's going to be messy. Resourcefulness trumps the resources you have, whether or not it just be like people or even money, just like your ability to be resourceful and to navigate those circumstances and to continue to put one foot in front of the other and to like find a path forward, is the game, And so at least for me, that's what came up with your last point, Brett, just like the importance of managing expectations. We talked about stoicism a few times today, but there's another concept in stoicism where they call premeditio malorum, which is just like meditate and think about, contemplate all of the bad shit that could happen. So that way, when it does, you're not surprised, because it very well could happen. Like I could what could, all of our strategic partnerships overnight could disappear. So it's like, cool, if that happens, what are you going to do? Or if you get injured with your training, what are you going to do? And so thinking about those before is useful.
Have you ever heard the concept that people with anxiety especially related to ADHD, are actually really, really good in a crisis because they've gone through all of the worst possible scenarios in their head hundreds of times already. And then when something that's 75% of as bad as happens, they're like, oh, okay, we can deal with this.
No big deal. Yeah. I've imagined worse, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
I mean, maybe that's taking it a little bit too far. Good to imagine those things, but not like dwell on them and internalize them too much. This is it's time. Nuance.
That's right. Yeah. We should legit. I mean, I think, Ryan, you don't drink at all, right? Maybe we'll get you like a diet Coke, but maybe for Brett and I, we'll make like some Moscow mules or Ukrainian mules. Maybe. I don't know if we drink Moscow mules anymore.
I don't know about 1 p.m. on a Tuesday drinking Moscow mules. You're welcome to.
Let's do it. Just pretend like you're on Swiss time.
It's Switzerland somewhere.
That's right. So, gentlemen, as we start to wrap up, what are some of your closing thoughts, like with regards to the value of doing hard things? What are some of your closing thoughts?
I think I found some holes in my own philosophies in this call, and realizing there's some things I need to work on, especially related to like social media and like, the fear associated with it, and like how much of it is me, and how much does it, if it doesn't matter, then like, why can't I just post it? That's something I'm definitely going to like dig into a little bit after this. But yeah, I mean, like, I'll talk endlessly about like how valuable just committing to a physical goal can be, and like how much confidence and competence it can give you, and like throughout the process, and then once you get into it, like how much fuller you feel as a human for having done it. Yeah, it's the thing I like the most about it in the end.
Yeah, I would say, as much as I am reluctant to be melodramatic, it is certainly the truth for myself. And I think that this is probably true of a lot of people who, get into this as a career. Like I feel like I owe, honestly, like everything in my life to fitness, like sport and fitness. Sometimes very pragmatically, like it's literally my job. It's how I make money. Relationships that I've built, but I think that the person that I am is a direct reflection of my experiences, on the court, on the ice, in the gym, so on and so forth. So as much as I try not to necessarily think about that stuff in the moment, as I like reflect upon my life, I think that it's very true that who I am is a construct of my experiences within the fitness space.
Yeah. Here, man. We're really lucky to work in this industry for a variety of reasons, Gentlemen, thank you so much for today / this evening for me. I appreciate you both. Thank you for pulling on this thread with me and, sharing your own personal and professional insights. It's been a lot of fun. And I know, I hope that our listeners got a lot out of it. So I hope you guys have a nice night, and I look forward to the next one. Cheers.
Thanks for having us. Bye for now.
Pleasure.